I remember the first time I stepped into that old house. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, makes your own breath feel loud. Fog curled along the edges of the forest path, pale light trembling through the bare branches. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp wood and something older, something waiting. The walls weren't just walls. They whispered when the wind shifted, carrying voices that sounded almost familiar, almost human. Each step across the creaking floorboards echoed like it belonged to someone else, someone watching. I thought it was just the wind at first, until I heard the soft tap, 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 as though fingers traced the inside of the wall. My heart stilled, the world narrowing down to that trembling sound. That's when I saw it. The hallway stretched longer than it should, wooden panels dark with age. A faint chill clung to the edges of my sleeves. Fog curled at the far doorway. Pale light leaked through cracks where no door had been before. I stopped. The air smelled faintly of dust and something colder, damp. I reached out. Fingers brushed the surface. Cold, sharp, winter pressed against my skin. A whisper stirred beneath my touch, almost inaudible, yet insistent. I tapped once, then twice. Each echo bounced along the narrow walls, unnaturally rhythmic. It was not just the wood. It was responding. Breath quickened. I pressed my palm flat against the door. Whispers tangled with my heartbeat. Something inside moved, just beyond perception. A rustling soft, like silk against skin. The door yielded under a gentle push. It swung open. The room waited. It was mine, and yet it wasn't. Familiar shapes twisted. Furniture where it had never been. Corners that didn't exist in the memory of my own home. Shadows slithered across walls, independent of light. They lingered at edges, watching. The silence pressed close. It wasn't empty. It was full of absence. Breath caught in my throat. I could hear my heartbeat. Fingers flexed. Feet shifted, barely audible against the floor. A hum rose from nowhere. Low, constant, not in the room, not in the walls. Somewhere beneath them. I realized then the room remembered me, or perhaps it remembered someone else entirely. I moved forward. Air thickened with the smell of old wood and cold stone. Curtains that had never hung whispered against a breeze I couldn't feel. Something shifted behind me. I dared not turn. The shadows stretched. Fingers of darkness brushed along familiar edges. Walls seemed to breathe. Soft footsteps echoed behind silence. Or maybe they were my own. I touched the chair. Smooth, cold. Its surface pulsed faintly, as if acknowledging me. I stepped closer to the window. Fog pressed against the glass. Outside, the night remained ordinary. Inside, it was all wrong. I leaned closer to the light spilling through the doorway. It shivered, pale and weak. A rustle, then nothing. The room held me in its stillness. I could hear my own thoughts, fragile and thin, a pulse in the floorboards, beneath the walls. It wasn't mine. I wanted to leave. The hallway waited behind me, but my feet stayed rooted. Something soft brushed against my ankle. The room breathed with me now, and I realized it had been waiting. A whisper grazed my ear. No words, just a hum of attention. I could feel it in the air, cold and expectant. I pressed my hand against the wall. It was warm, almost alive. The shadows recoiled slightly, then returned. The doorway behind me flickered. For a moment, I thought it might vanish. I wanted it to, but it stayed, leaking pale light, patient, watching. I exhaled slowly. The silence thickened around me. Only breath and shadow remained. I wanted to turn. I wanted to know. And yet, I could not move. The living room smelled of old wood and faint smoke. Shadows clung to the corners, stretched long by the weak evening light. I stepped across the floor, each footfall slow, deliberate. A soft hum rose beneath me, not from above. It came from the boards themselves. Low, constant, vibrating under my soles. The floor groaned with each step, but it wasn't just with creaking. It whispered, a quiet, persistent murmuring that tickled the edges of thought. I knelt, the grain of the wood pressed against my palms. Cold, dry, I pressed my ear closer. Voices, faint, indecipherable, secrets carried beneath the planks. I traced the gaps with trembling fingers. Each one seemed to stretch longer than it should. A shiver rose along my spine. One plank lifted slightly under my touch. A dark hollow stared back. I could feel the air shift. Cool, heavy, a faint smell, earthy damp like soil turned in hidden depths. I wanted to step back. I wanted to leave the room and never return. But my fingers stayed. The whispering drew me in, closer to the opening. Curiosity tangled with fear. I peered into the hole. The darkness swallowed it whole. It seemed to breathe. The hum rose in response, wrapping around my chest. My own breath felt loud in the sudden silence. A rustle beneath the floorboards. Or was it my imagination? Soft footsteps, careful, hesitant, beneath the boards, echoing the rhythm of the hum. I pressed my ear again. Fragments of words brushed against my mind. I could not understand them. They slipped through, just out of reach. A secret language, spoken for someone else. The room seemed to shrink. Walls leaned closer. The ceiling lowered. Shadows stretched toward me. The light from the window was pale, insufficient. I touched the edges of the plank. Rough, splintered, yet it moved slightly under my hand, as if alive. A pulse, faint, like a heartbeat beneath the boards. The hum shifted, low then higher, tugging at the corners of my vision. I could feel it in my teeth, a vibration in my chest. I wanted to stand. My knees were rooted. The darkness beneath the lifted planks seemed to breathe. A faint smell rose, wet, earthy, like rain in a cellar. I imagined something waiting, patient, quiet, watching. I traced the gap further. Small cracks along the floorboard whispered. Each one held the memory of feet that had never touched this floor. Soft footsteps brushing past, lost beneath time. The hum softened. It became a single note, rising, falling, almost like a sigh. I could feel it in my fingertips, in the soles of my shoes. I wanted to leave. I tried to rise, but the air around me thickened. It pressed against my chest. Silent insistence, pulling me back toward the opening. I glanced around the room. Familiar shapes warped. Corners that should have ended stretched into shadow. The light flickered, weak, uncertain. I knelt longer, listening, feeling. The whispering beneath the floorboards grew louder in my mind than in reality. Secrets brushing past the edge of hearing. I could not make sense of them. I did not want to. The darkness beneath the planks seemed endless. I imagined tiny shapes moving, shifting, hiding. Something waiting. The hum carried it to me. Close. Familiar. Threatening. I lifted my hand. The plank fell back into place. The hollow swallowed the whisper again. The hum faded. The shadows settled. I stood, feet heavy, breath shallow. The living room returned to its quiet. Yet beneath me, I knew the voices remained. Patient, waiting, beneath the floorboards. I could not leave. And yet, I wanted to. The hallway smelled faintly of damp plaster. Evening light filtered through narrow windows, pale and weak. Shadows leaned along the walls, stretching longer than they should. A cracked mirror hung before me, its edges jagged, catching the dim light. I stepped closer. My reflection stared back. It moved differently, a fraction of a beat too late. A subtle delay that made the skin along my neck prickle. Pale fog seemed trapped behind the glass. It swirled lazily, curling around the corners of my face. I blinked. The figure shifted. A small, almost imperceptible smile where I did not smile. Cold, knowing, wrong. My heart hammered. I could feel it in my throat, heavy against the silence. The air thickened, static brushing against my skin. Fingertips tingled where they hovered near the glass. I stepped back, a slow, deliberate motion. The reflection did not. It remained, anchored to the mirror, watching, waiting. I reached out. The surface was cold, rough around the cracks. Yet the fog seemed to pulse beneath my fingertips, alive. I wanted to draw back, but I could not. I traced the cracks with a finger. Each line held a tiny ripple of movement. The reflection moved with them, but always a fraction behind. An echo of myself, but sharper, crueler. The hallway seemed to shrink. Walls leaned closer. The faint hum of the house, or was it inside the mirror? filled my ears. Soft footsteps pressed behind the silence, though I was alone. I leaned closer. Breath fogged the glass. The reflection's eyes caught mine. They lingered, fixed, unblinking. I felt pulled toward it. A subtle tug, gentle yet insistent. I tried to look away. The mirror demanded attention. Shadows danced behind my shoulders, moving in tandem with the figure. They whispered along the edges of perception. A flicker. The reflection tilted its head where I did not. A soft, crooked grin that stretched impossibly. Cold air brushed my ear. A faint metallic tang rose in my nose, like iron in rain. I backed further. The hallway stretched longer than memory allowed. The mirror hung silent, yet the figure remained, anchored, patient, watching. I felt the floor beneath me shift slightly. Or perhaps it was a mirror that breathed. The static thickened, pressing against my skin. I could hear my own heartbeat, rapid and hollow. I touched the glass again. The fog pulsed, swirling around my fingers. The reflection mimicked me, almost perfectly, yet its smile lingered, cruel, after my own lips relaxed. I stepped back once more. The light weakened. Shadows swallowed corners. The hallway whispered along the edges of hearing. Soft teasing. I could not leave the mirror, and it would not leave me. I exhaled slowly. Breath fogged again. The reflection tilted, observing, waiting. I turned slightly. The hallway stretched on, empty, quiet, but the figure remained, anchored, patient, the smile lingering where I had none. I wanted to blink it away. I wanted it gone, yet it stayed, and in the silence, I understood the reflection had decided it would wait. I could not move, and yet I could not look away. The attic stairs groaned beneath me. Each step stretched the silence, small echoes curling back from shadows. Dust motes danced in the pale lantern light. They floated like tiny ghosts, trembling in the stale air. Above, something shifted. A rustling, careful, deliberate, like old belongings being sorted, moved, rearranged. The sound pressed against my ears, soft yet insistent. I called out. My voice trembled, small against the weight of the attic. Silence answered, thick, heavy, expectant. The lantern trembled in my hand. Its light traced shapes that should have been familiar. Boxes stacked unevenly, old trunks leaning. Shadows clung to their edges, stretching unnaturally toward me. A box moved, sliding across the floor, without a touch. It would whisper along the boards, leaving faint scratches behind. I froze, fingers tight on the lantern. The smell of old paper and damp filled my nose. It was sweet and musty, like forgotten memories, decaying slowly. I breathed shallow. The rustling continued. Something behind the boxes shifted again, patient and deliberate. It was not wind, not the house settling. Something alive, but hidden. A soft hum brushed the edges of my hearing. Familiar, almost a lullaby. I could not place it, yet it tugged at my memory, curling around my thoughts. I stepped closer. Lantern light trembled over the floor. Shadows recoiled, then returned. Dust swirled around my ankles. Each breath carried the scent of damp and age, pressing against my chest. The box stopped moving. Silence fell, thick and expectant. I waited, waiting for another shift, another whisper. But the attic seemed to hold its breath with me. A soft scratch behind the wall. Then nothing. The hum rose slightly. A note, almost like a voice singing just beneath understanding. I knelt slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the sliding box. It was smooth, cold, the scent of old paper stronger here, mingling with the damp. The shadows stretched, creeping along the ceiling and walls. Something moved in the corner of my vision, always just out of reach. The hum shifted again, rising and falling, brushing the edges of my thoughts. I realized I was holding my breath. The air thickened, static pressing gently against my skin. A faint rustle closer, yet unseen. I wanted to step back. I wanted to leave. Yet my hand stayed on the box. The attic held me, patient, quiet, expectant. Lantern light flickered. Shadows danced across stacks of forgotten belongings. Dust floated in slow spirals, like smoke from a long-extinguished candle. The hum softened. The room seemed to exhale with me. I rose carefully. Every step deliberate, slow, careful. The box stayed in place. The rustling stopped. The attic smelled of dust, damp and secrets. A faint, lingering song hummed beneath the floorboards. I exhaled slowly, letting the sound drift past my ears. The lantern light fell across the ceiling beams. Shadows leaned toward the walls. I understood then. I was not alone. I could leave, but something in the attic would remain, watching, waiting, and the hum would linger, soft and patient, long after I had gone. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Familiar would yet unfamiliar. My bedroom, and yet not. Shelves lined the walls. Objects rested on them, heavy and still, yet somehow aware. I stepped forward. The air hummed, alive, brushing my skin with anticipation. A chair shifted an inch when I looked away. A book tilted, as if breathing under its own weight. The light from the window fell pale across the floor. Shadows pulled where corners should have ended. They clung to edges, curling, waiting. I inhaled. The scent of old paper and varnish pressed against my nose. Dust floated in spirals, disturbed by no movement I could see. The floor creaked beneath soft steps. Or perhaps the room itself shifted beneath me. I reached out. Fingers brushed the shelf. Smooth wood, warm from the faint sunlight, yet slightly cold beneath the skin. The objects on it seemed to notice. A subtle tilt. A pause. The room breathed with me. Walls expanded, then contracted. A soft hum rose beneath my feet. Fell in the soles of my shoes. It was patient, quiet, watching. I stepped closer. The chair moved again, small, deliberate. A shadow stretched across the floor, bending impossibly toward the corner. The shelves seemed endless, hiding corners I could not reach. I blinked. Something shifted behind me. I turned slowly. Nothing, but the air felt thicker, electric, like static brushing along skin. A book slid slightly along the shelf. I bent closer. The letters on the spine blurred, then snapped back into place. The smell of ink and dust rose, thick and sweet. I realized the room remembered or imagined me. The shadows deepened. Corners that should have been empty now held weight. The light trembled, pale and flickering. I could hear my own breath echoing along walls that had never felt this close. I walked further in. Objects shifted again when I wasn't watching. A jar rocked. A picture leaned. A small hum rose, brushing along the air, soft and constant. The room pulsed, alive, silent and patient. It mirrored my movements, yet followed its own rhythm. I wanted to reach out, to touch something real, but nothing stayed still long enough. I pressed my hand against the wall, warm, pulsing faintly, almost like skin. Shadows recoiled slightly, then returned, pulling deeper into corners. The hum grew lower, resonating through the floor. I stepped back. The light waned. Objects settled for a heartbeat, only to shift again the instant I looked away. The room had no edges I could trust. I exhaled slowly. Breath fogged the air. A faint rustling of papers, or perhaps a whisper, brushed against my ear, teasing at the edge of thought. I stood still. The room breathed with me. The shadows, the hum, the objects patient, watching. I wanted to leave, yet curiosity anchored my feet. I could feel the air pull softly, insistently, toward the shelves. The room waited, and I waited with it. The window's pale light trembled across the floorboards. Shadows curled and pulled. The objects shifted. The chair tilted. A book leaned. The room had changed, and I could not turn away. The hallway smelled of dust and cold wood. Evening light fell pale across the floorboards. Shadows lingered where corners met, stretching longer than they should. A small hand mirror rested against the wall, its surface coated in dust, dull and still. I reached down. Fingers brushed the cold glass. As I lifted it, murmurs rose, soft, fleeting, brushing against my ear. Almost familiar, yet impossible to understand. The glass fogged. Shapes formed within it. Not mine. Fleeting faces pressed against the other side. Mouths moving silently. I blinked. The images shifted. Taunting, distant, unnerving. Each glance felt longer than the last. A whisper of breath, a flicker along the edges of thought. The hallway seemed to shrink. Walls leaned closer. The floorboards hung beneath soft, tentative steps I did not make. Shadows pooled and receded. The mirror trembled faintly in my hands. I leaned closer. The faces blurred, eyes wide, pale, mouths moving, forming words I could not hear. The air pressed against my skin, thick with anticipation. A metallic tang lingered in my nose. I tried to look away. The glass resisted. Shapes lingered at the edge of vision, floating just beyond understanding. The whispers followed, soft patient, brushing along my skull, insistent. I lowered the mirror slowly. Dust shifted across the hallway, disturbed by nothing I could see. The murmurs continued, faint, teasing, refusing to leave. The hallway felt longer now. Shadows clung to walls and corners. The light trembled, flickering along the polished wood. Every heartbeat echoed too loudly, each footstep uncertain. I set the mirror down. The surface dimmed, dull beneath the faint light, yet the whispers remained, lingering in the quiet, curling along edges, filling the space where silence should have been. I took a breath. The air thickened, heavy with unseen presence. Shadows pulsed subtly, moving without cause. I could feel eyes just beyond the edge of perception. The mirror sat still. Faces vanished, leaving only a faint fog behind. Yet the murmurs persisted, soft patient, whispering along the hall, just beneath hearing. I stepped back. The floorboards creaked softly under careful feet. The hallway stretched longer than memory allowed. Shadows leaned, waiting, attentive. I wanted to leave, yet my eyes kept returning to the mirror, to the fog, the shapes, the whispers. It had decided to linger. And so did I. The hallway smelled faintly of wax and damp wood. Evening fog seeped through the cracks of the window, curling along the floorboards. Shadows clung to corners, trembling in the pale light. A lamp flickered in the corner, its glow weak, uncertain. Shadows stretched and crawled along the walls. I noticed they moved faster than they should. Long fingers, hunched figures, shapes that bent impossibly. They shifted with quiet intent, brushing against the edges of vision. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles. Each breath tasted damp, metallic, like rain falling on stone. I froze. The lamp flared. A figure appeared, pale, fleeting, eyes I could not focus on. It vanished when I blinked. The air pressed against my chest, tight and heavy. I stepped closer, careful. The floorboards whispered underfoot. The shadows seemed to lean toward me, patient, watching. The lamp flickered again. The shapes writhed in response. The silence around me hummed, low, insistent, vibrating through the floor. I could feel it in my teeth, in the back of my throat. The fog curled higher, brushing along my sleeves. I reached out toward the light. Fingers trembled. The shadows recoiled slightly, only to stretch again. Figures hunched, twisting. Long fingers brushing invisible surfaces. The lamp flared once more. Another figure appeared, sharp and impossible. Then gone. Every blink reshaped the hallway. Every heartbeat echoed, louder than the last. I tried to breathe slowly. The fog wrapped around my ankles, damp, clinging. The smell of cold stone mixed with old wax. The shadows moved independently, alive. I stepped back. The lamp dimmed. The hallway stretched longer than it had a moment ago. Shadows pulled at the edges, patient. Figures bent toward walls that should have been empty. I could feel the hum beneath the floorboards. Low, constant, vibrating in rhythm with my own heartbeat. The fog swirled, brushing my hair against my face. A faint metallic tang lingered, almost imperceptible. I wanted to leave, yet the light flared again, pale and unsteady. A figure appeared briefly, just beyond focus. I blinked. Gone. The silence pressed close, heavy with expectation. Shadows pulled at the corners. Fog lingered along the boards. The lamp's glow trembled, stretching, shrinking till I exhaled slowly. The hallway waited, patient, watching, and the hum continued low and insistent, echoing along the walls. I could move, but I did not. I could leave, yet I remained, anchored by the flicker of pale light. Night pressed against the windows. The house smelled of damp wood and faint dust. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching long along the walls. Soft murmurings rose from behind the wallpaper, almost words, almost coherent, a faint repetition of my name, curling along my spine. I pressed my ear closer. The voices multiplied, overlapping, a whispering chorus, indistinct but urgent, a faint rustling beneath, like fingernails tracing the wall. I stepped back. The murmurs ceased. A silence, so complete it pressed against my ears. My own breath sounded loud, hollow. Then the voices returned, louder, clearer, now flowing along the hallway. The floorboard hummed beneath careful, imagined footsteps. The house seemed to breathe, aware, patient, watching. I leaned against the wall. Cold pressed against my skin. The air thickened, static brushing along my hair. The wallpaper rippled faintly, as if alive. Shadows shifted. Scratches traced patterns I could not follow. Faint, uneven, persistent. The voices layered with them, murmuring names I could not place. I inhaled slowly. The smell of old plaster, mingled with damp, filled my lungs. My heartbeat thudded in rhythm with the murmurs. Soft footsteps echoed in the hall, though I was alone. I stepped cautiously forward. The shadows leaned toward me. The walls seemed to stretch, bending impossibly along the edges of vision. The murmurs rose in response, low, insistent, brushing against thought. I pressed my hand against the wallpaper, rough, textured, vibrating faintly beneath my touch. The voices flickered, shifting along the wall. A cold hum pulsed in the floor beneath me. The house breathed with me. I exhaled slowly. The murmurs softened, curling like smoke, yet the sensation remained. Eyes unseen, observing. The walls alive, attentive. I wanted to step back. The whispers followed, brushing my skull. Fingers of sound, curling along my hair, my shoulders. Static hum pressed against skin and bone. The hallway stretched longer. Shadows pooled, moved slightly in response to my gaze. The murmurs layered with rustling, scratching, waiting. I could feel their presence without seeing them. I finally stepped away. The voices receded slightly. The scratches stopped, fading into silence. Yet the house remained aware, patient. I breathed slowly. The walls settled. Shadows remained, soft and watchful. The murmurs lingered, curling beneath perception. I could leave, but the house, it would remember. The corridor smelled of cold wood and faint damp. Fog curled along the floorboards, thick and slow. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching long in the pale light. Each step I took, another echo behind me. Soft, careful, mirroring mine exactly. I stopped. So did they. I turned slowly. The hall was empty, silent, patient, waiting. I moved again. The footsteps resumed, echoing along the boards, brushing against the walls. Soft, deliberate, impossible to ignore. The fog thickened. It pressed against my ankles, curling along my shoes. The walls seemed to close in. Shadows stretched and shifted as though alive. I tried to breathe slowly. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation. Static prickled along my skin. Every heartbeat felt too loud. I stopped once more. The footsteps paused again. A quiet, tense silence filled the corridor. Then movement, a faint rustle along the edges of vision. I stepped forward. The corridor bent slightly, impossibly. Shadows pooled where none should be. The fog wrapped higher, brushing my sleeves and hair. A metallic tang lingered in my nose. The footsteps resumed, closed now, just behind me, matching every step. I wanted to turn. I wanted to run. But the corridor stretched longer than I remembered. Shadows leaned toward me. The fog pressed against my chest. I reached out, fingers brushing the wall, rough with beneath trembling skin. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. The silence pressed closer. Then a shift, movement in the corner of my eye. Impossible shapes, bending, pooling. The fog swirled, carrying the faint scent of cold stone and damp plaster. I exhaled slowly. The footsteps returned as I moved again. Soft, insistent, patient. Every step mirrored. Every pause echoed. I realized then I was not alone. Not by distance, but by presence. The corridor itself watched. The shadows moved with intent. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. A low hum vibrated beneath the floorboards. The air pressed gently. Waiting, I took a slow step forward. Shadows shifted in response. The fog swirled around my ankles. I felt them close, unseen, observing. The corridor stretched endlessly. Every step echoed, mirrored, measured. I could feel the walls leaning, listening. The fog curling higher. The footsteps persistent, patient. I exhaled. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then movement returned. Shadows, fog, echoing steps. The corridor breathed with me. I could leave, but they would remain, watching, following, patient. The hallway smelled faintly of cold wood and old plaster. Evening fog crept along the floorboards, curling around my shoes. Shadows pulled in corners, stretching thin and long. I reached for the doorknob. Fingers brushed the cold metal. A sudden chill grazed my shoulder. I whipped around. The hallway was empty, silent, waiting. The cold lingered, crawling along my skin, brushing along the spine. The air pressed against my chest, still and unmoving. My breath fogged the space before me, curling slowly in pale spirals. The walls whispered, soft, faint, secrets too subtle to understand. A rustling like old paper stirred beneath the quiet. I stepped back. The chill followed. Fingers of cold traced along my sleeve. Static prickled along my hair and neck. The hallway stretched. Shadows shifted along the edges of vision. Light trembled, pale and uncertain. The fog curled higher, brushing ankles and wrists. I exhaled slowly. The whispering grew, faintly melodic, teasing, impossible to catch. I felt the weight of presence behind me, patient, observant. I pressed my hand against the wall. Cold, slightly damp. It pulsed faintly as if breathing. The chill on my shoulder persisted, curling across skin and bone. I moved cautiously. The hallway bent slightly, impossibly. Shadows deepened, pooling in corners that should have been empty. The fog thickened, brushing against my nose and mouth. I tried to step forward. The chill followed with every motion. The whispers layered with soft rustling. The air hummed faintly, low and insistent. I stopped. The hallway remained silent for a heartbeat. Then a faint shiver of movement along the wall. A whisper brushed my ear, fleeting and distant. The chill lingered, patient, insistent. I exhaled slowly again. My breath hung in the air, pale and curling. The shadows leaned closer. The hallway seemed to tighten, edges pressing in. I could leave, yet the presence remained. Cold, watching, waiting. The walls whispered. The fog lingered. The chill traced along my shoulder one last time before fading slightly. I took a careful step forward. The hallway stretched, silent and patient. The shadows receded just a fraction, but memory of cold and whispers remained. And I understood the house had noticed me, and it would not forget. The evening fog pressed against the window pane. Cold air seeped through the cracks, curling along the sill. Shadows stretched long across the floorboards. I looked out. The world beyond was not my own. A forest, thick with fog, stretched endlessly. Trees swayed in rhythm that did not belong to wind. Shadows moved against their own motion, deliberate, patient. Something watched. Far away, just beyond the fog. I could feel its gaze pressing along my spine. Waiting, silent. I blinked. The world outside shifted. Normal, my familiar street. Houses and lights, as they should be. Yet the air trembled. A soft tapping echoed against the glass. Deliberate, measured, reminding me the forest had not vanished, only hidden, patient, waiting. I pressed my hand to window. Cold metal and frost against my skin. The tapping continued, faint, insistent. Shadows along the sill moved slightly, stretching into corners. The fog thickened beyond the glass. Trees swayed in impossible rhythm again. Branches bent where no wind blew. A metallic tang lingered in the air. Something stirred at the edge of perception. I exhaled slowly. Breath fogged the glass. The tapping paused, then returned, soft and deliberate. I leaned closer. Shapes flickered just beyond focus. Something moved in the forest, larger than any tree. Patient, watching, waiting. The room felt tighter. Shadows leaned toward the window. The fog curled around the sill, cold and damp. Every heartbeat echoed in rhythm with the tapping. I tried to look away. The world outside shifted back to normal, but the tapping reminded me otherwise. A presence remained, just beyond sight. I stepped back. The cold lingered along my fingertips. The shadows receded slightly, yet the sense of being watched did not fade. I exhaled slowly. The fog beyond the window swirled faintly. The tapping continued, soft, insistent, patient. I could turn away. I could leave the window behind. Yet I knew the forest waited, and whatever watched from beyond the fog would not forget I had seen. The kitchen smelled of cold tile and faint, lingering steam. Shadows pooled beneath the cabinets, stretching toward the corners. The evening fog crept through the cracked window, curling along the floor. A whisper called my name. Familiar, impossible. My mind insisted it couldn't be real. Yet I moved, drawn toward the sound. Soft footsteps brushing along the tile. The air thickened, damp and metallic against my skin. I followed it to a dark corner. The whisper stopped. Silence pressed against me, heavy, dense, almost solid. I could feel it in my chest, against my ribs. A presence lingered there, patient, knowing me, remembering me. Yet not me. Fear curled along my spine, pooling in my stomach. The shadows leaned closer. The floor hummed faintly beneath my weight. Static prickled along my neck, raising hairs I didn't realize had fallen. The whisper resumed, behind me this time. Soft, taunting, deliberate. I turned slowly. Empty air, yet the presence pressed against my senses, unseen, patient, attentive. The faint scent of old wood and cold metal lingered, curling along my sleeves. I took a careful step forward. Shadows quivered along the cabinets and the walls. The air pressed heavier with each breath, thick with anticipation. The whisper curled around me again, brushing along the edges of hearing. I exhaled slowly. The room felt smaller, the ceiling lower, the walls bending imperceptibly. The whispering lingered, patient, repeating my name like a chant. Static hummed faintly beneath the tiles. I reached the counter, fingers brushing cold stone. The presence seemed to move with me, watching, waiting. Shadows pooled in corners where none should exist. The air tasted damp, metallic, curling along my tongue. I wanted to leave, yet I was anchored by the sound, by recognition, by the impossible intimacy of being known by someone or something that was not me. The whisper repeated once more, closer now, curling along my ear, brushing my hair. I could feel it in my chest, heavy, pressing. The silence returned briefly, thick and waiting. I exhaled slowly again. The shadows receded slightly. The presence lingered. The whisper faded, leaving only memory in the corners of the room. I could step away. I could leave the kitchen behind. Yet the sense of being watched, of being known, would follow me into every shadowed corner. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and lingering smoke. Evening fog crept through the cracks in the windows, curling along the floor. Shadows clung to corners, stretching thin and long. They moved first subtly, a flicker along the wall, then longer, deliberate, unnatural. I noticed them mimicking movements I had not made. I froze. The air thickened, damp against my skin. The house seemed to exhale, a low hum vibrating beneath the floorboards. Shadows pooled along the walls, bending where no light should fall. I stepped cautiously forward. The shadows shifted again. Slow, deliberate, a dance I could not follow. Cold air brushed my neck and wrists. I tried to blink the hallucination away. The shapes remained, stretching longer, twisting sharper. They pulled in corners where none should exist. The fog swirled higher, brushing against ankles and hair. A soft rustling accompanied the movement. Impossible, patient. The shadows leaned closer to the floorboards and walls, curling along my footsteps. I exhaled slowly, breath fogging the air in pale spirals. I felt trapped. between the familiar and the impossible. The walls bent imperceptibly, stretching the hallway. Static hummed along the edges of vision. I pressed my hand against the wall. Cold, slightly damp. The shadows shifted again, independent of my touch. They pooled in corners, deep and patient, as though waiting. The house exhaled once more. A low vibration pressed along my chest. The darkness swallowed corners, curling into the edges of the floor. Shadows stretched unnaturally across walls, deliberate, patient. I stepped back. They mimicked movements I had not made. Every pause, every small motion was mirrored by darkness. The fog thickened, wrapping around ankles and sleeves. I exhaled slowly. The hallway seemed to contract, edges leaning inward. The shadows shifted, curling, stretching, bending. A faint metallic tang lingered in the air. I could move, but I did not. The darkness pulsed softly, alive, aware. Every flicker, every stretch reminded me I was not alone. I breathed slowly. The shadows pulled into corners again, patient, deliberate. The house seemed to settle, holding its breath. The fog lingered along the boards. I understood. The shadows moved with intent. They were patient. They were waiting. And I was between what I knew and what was impossible. The hall smelled faintly of cold wood and old plaster. Fog curled along the floorboards, thick and slow. Shadows pulled in corners, stretching thin and long. A soft laugh drifted, distant, childlike, almost friendly, yet wrong. It moved through the hall, teasing, circling, elusive. I tried to trace it, step by step, but it shifted, always just beyond reach. The fog thickened. It brushed along my ankles and wrists, damp and cold. The shadows stretched along the walls, pooling where they shouldn't. My own heartbeat rose, louder than the laugh, pounding against ribs and throat. Yet the laughter lingered, even when I could no longer hear it clearly. I stepped forward. The air pressed against my skin, heavy and damp. Shadows quivered faintly at the edges of vision. The laugh drifted closer, then away, teasing, patient. I held my breath. The fog swirled higher, brushing my sleeves and hair. The walls hummed faintly beneath my feet, pulsing. The echo of laughter seemed to stretch, growing thin, impossible. I tried to listen. The sound moved around me, circling corners, brushing the edges of walls. It was playful, yet wrong, like a memory twisted. I exhaled slowly. The shadows deepened. The fog lingered, curling around ankles and toes. The laughter was distant, almost a whisper, yet it brushed along my skin, curling at the base of my neck. I moved forward, careful. Every step echoed. The laugh shifted in response, just beyond the next corner. The hallway seemed longer, stretched, alive. I stopped. The echo lingered, teasing. I felt it more than heard it now. A vibration in the walls, a hum through the floorboards, a presence circling me. I exhaled again. The shadows receded slightly, but the laughter remained, soft, patient, impossible to trace. The fog swirled, brushing along my ankles, lingering in my hair. I could leave, yet the echo followed. It would linger in corners. It would linger in memory. Patient, teasing, waiting. The fog seeped in through the windows. Cold, damp, curling around my ankles. The hall smelled faintly of wet wood and old plaster. Soft steps crunching behind me. I froze, turned. Nothing. The sound continued, circling, echoing in corners. The fog thickened, brushing my sleeves, curling around my hair. I breathed slowly. The house seemed to inhale with me, exhaling in faint, damp breaths. The air was heavy, metallic, pressing against skin and lungs. I stepped forward. The fog moved with me, curling and shifting around ankles and floorboards. Soft footsteps followed, patient, deliberate. Every echo stretched, impossible, layered. I stopped. They stopped. I moved again. They resumed. The rhythm mimicked mine, yet never fully aligned. The walls leaned slightly, bending perception. Shadows pulled in corners, deeper than the fog. I could feel the vibration of the footsteps beneath the floorboards, pulsing softly. Cold air brushed the back of my neck, wrapping around my shoulders. I tried to listen closer. The footsteps circled, invisible. The fog whispered along the boards, rustling softly with each step. The house seemed alive, breathing with the fog, patient and watchful. I exhaled slowly. The mist curled higher, brushing against my face. Every movement echoed, drawing me deeper into silence. The footsteps were everywhere and nowhere. I pressed a hand against the damp wall. Cold, slightly slick. The fog swirled around fingers and wrists, curling into sleeves. The steps shifted, circling again, deliberate. I wanted to leave, yet my feet remained rooted. The fog, the echoes, the silence, they held me. The house breathed with me, patient, aware, insistent. I moved again, slowly, careful. The footsteps followed, mimicking, circling, impossible. The hall stretched, bending slightly. Shadows pooled in corners, feeding on the fog. The air pressed against my chest, cold and damp, breath fog in small, trembling clouds. I stopped once more. The footsteps hesitated. The fog thickened around ankles and toes. The house held its breath, patient, aware. I exhaled. The steps retreated slightly, circling in the distance. The mist lingered, brushing against skin, curling along floorboards. The silence remained, heavy, alive. I could move. I could leave the hall behind. Yet the echo of footsteps, the curling fog, would follow me into every corner, every shadow, every breath. The hallway smelled faintly of varnish and dust. The pale light from the windows stretched along the floorboards. Shadows pooled in corners, long and patient. A portrait hung against the wall, eyes too lifelike. They seemed to follow me as I passed. I hurried, yet the gaze lingered. Each glance back revealed subtle changes. A curl of the lips, a narrowing of eyes, almost mocking. I pressed forward. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, echoing softly. The air felt thick, damp against my skin. The house exhaled faintly, a hum vibrating beneath the walls. I stopped mid-step. The eyes in the portrait held mine, cold, patient, observing. I felt trapped under quiet scrutiny. The shadow from the window stretched across the frame. The eyes seemed to shift with it. The room smelled faintly of old paper and wood polish. A static hum pressed at the edges of hearing. I stepped forward again. The expression changed subtly once more. Not drastic, barely noticeable, yet unmistakable. I pressed my hand to the wall, cold, smooth. The floor beneath was firm, yet the house seemed alive, breathing, watching. The portrait's gaze lingered in corners of my vision. I could feel it pressing against my shoulder, unseen, patient. I exhaled slowly. The shadows receded slightly. The light shifted, brushing across the painting, revealing another subtle change. The lips curved faintly. The eyes sharpened. The mocking patience remained. I tried to turn away, but the gaze followed. It lingered in my peripheral vision, bending along walls and floorboards. The hall seemed narrower, bending imperceptibly toward the portrait. I moved slowly past it. The floorboards hummed beneath my feet. Dust swirled in the pale light, curling along ankles and sleeves. The air pressed cold and damp against my skin. I exhaled again, quietly. The eyes shifted once more. The faintest curl, a whisper of a smile. I felt observed. Trapped under a tension I could not escape. The hall seemed to sigh. Shadows pooled in corners. The air tasted faintly metallic, curling along my tongue. The portrait watched still, patient, waiting. I continued down the hall, careful. The eyes followed, subtle, relentless. I could feel their weight in the silence, pressing along my back, curling in corners, filling the space I moved through. I could step away. I could leave the hallway. Yet the memory of the gaze, the subtle changes, would follow me, patient, ever watchful, in every shadow, every breath. The hall was pitch black. The air smelled faintly of cold wood and damp plaster. Shadows clung to corners I could not see. A breath, shallow, steady. I froze, straining to locate it. Silence returned. Then the breath resumed, closer. My own heartbeat began to merge with it. A rhythm too aligned, too deliberate. I stepped forward slowly. The floorboards were smooth and cold beneath my feet. The darkness shifted, alive, brushing against ankles and sleeves. The air pressed damp and metallic along my skin. The breath pulsed again, patient, watching, filling the hall with a quiet insistence. I could feel it in my chest, pressing against my lungs. A presence beside me, just out of sight. The silence between breaths hummed faintly, vibrating through the walls. I exhaled slowly. The darkness shifted slightly, curling along floorboards and walls. The breath continued, merging with mine, following me, patient, waiting. I tried to listen closer. Every step I took echoed softly. The hall seemed to stretch, bending in ways my eyes could not perceive. The air felt heavier, cold pressing along shoulders and neck. The breathing drew nearer, then paused. The house seemed to hold its breath with me. I pressed a hand against the wall. Cold, slightly damp. The presence lingered, patient, just beyond my vision. I exhaled again. The darkness pressed closer, shifting slightly with each inhalation. The breath pulsed in rhythm with mine, patient, deliberate. I realized fully I was not alone. I moved forward slowly. The shadows pooled at the edges, curling into shapes my mind could not name. The breath shifted with me, closer still, impossible to locate. The air smelled faintly metallic, cold along my tongue. I stopped. The rhythm continued. The hall seemed alive, the darkness pressing, aware. The steady, shallow breaths wrapped around me, patient, waiting. I exhaled softly. The presence lingered in corners, along floorboards, in the black. The breath pulsed beside mine. The shadows quivered, stretching just beyond sight. I could feel them, patient, alive, aware. I could leave the hall. I could step away into lighter rooms. Yet the breath followed, merging, lingering, patient. The darkness had not released me. The walls pulsed faintly in the quiet. The house exhaled around me, old air curling damp and cold. Shadows clung to corners, stretching along floorboards. A voice hissed through the walls. Urgent, fearful. I froze, straining to understand. Faint words reached me. Do not follow. The syllables trembled, dissolving into silence. Yet the air throbbed with their echo, vibrating softly beneath my fingertips. My pulse quickened. The floor felt alive beneath my shoes, humming faintly. Dust swirled along the edges of the walls, curling along ankles and sleeves. The voice pressed insistently against my chest, urgent, echoing. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat. Yet curiosity rooted me heavy, immovable. The walls seemed to breathe. A soft thrum moved through the plaster, vibrating along my arms. The voice repeated, faintly, almost drowned by the hum of the house. Do not follow. Each syllable pressed closer, patient, insistent. I stepped forward slowly. The air grew damp, metallic against my tongue. The shadows shifted slightly, curling along the corners like smoke. The pulse in the walls echoed my heartbeat, merging with it. I exhaled quietly. The voice hissed again, urgent, nearly lost in the silence. The house seemed to lean inward, enclosing, watching, aware. Every sense stretched tight, touch, smell, sound, alert, trembling. I pressed a hand to the wall, cold, smooth, vibrating softly under my palm. The whispered warning throbbed through the surface. The floor hummed beneath me, patient and alive. I stepped back. The walls throbbed faintly, echoing each heartbeat. The voice faded, yet lingered in corners of hearing, a shadow of fear curling in the silence. I could leave. I could step away into lighter rooms. Yet the memory of the hiss, the thrum, the soft, urgent warning, rooted me in place, heavy, aware. I exhaled again, slowly, letting the damp air curl along my face. The house sighed. The shadows receded only slightly. The voice lingered, patient, beneath the walls, a warning, faint, intimate, impossible to ignore. The corridor stretched before me, familiar yet wrong. The walls were pale, the air thick, fog curling along the edges of my shoes. Each step sounded too loud, echoing as if the space itself were listening. The doors, they were not where they should be. I turned, expecting the hall to continue as usual, but each corner led me back. The same place. Walls shifting silently, rearranging when I wasn't looking. The air tasted faintly metallic, cold, sharp, curling on my tongue and settling in my chest. A soft hum vibrated beneath the floorboards, subtle, patient. I stepped forward, and the corridor breathed with me. I tried to mark my path. A crack in the paint, a scuff on the wood. Each mark was gone when I looked again. The fog thickened, curling along my ankles, tugging me deeper. Shadows pulled unnaturally along the walls. They stretched, elongated, flickering in shapes I could not name. Each turn, each step repeated. I passed the same doors, the same corners, the same emptiness. I pressed a hand to the wall. Cold, smooth, vibrating faintly beneath my palm. The texture shifted slightly, as if alive. The corridor seemed aware of my presence, watching, listening. I stopped, breathed slowly. The echoes of my footsteps circled back, swallowed, then returned, delayed, distorted. I tried to turn, to choose another path. The walls closed subtly enough that I only realized when the fog pressed harder. The silence was heavy, almost physical. It pressed against my chest, curling along my ribs, curling around my ears. I could smell faint rust, old paint, the dampness of forgotten corners. I could feel the hall shifting beneath my weight, gentle and constant. I moved again. The corridor stretched, twisted, endlessly looping. Every door looked the same, every corner familiar, and yet none led anywhere I knew. A faint static filled the air, like electricity dancing along the edges of my skin. The fog swirled, thickening, hugging the walls, curling around ankles, sleeves, hair. The corridor exhaled slowly, almost like it was breathing with me. I paused in the center, letting the echo of my footsteps fade. The metallic taste lingered. The walls seemed to shimmer slightly in the pale light, shifting just enough to make my stomach twist. I realized I was not just lost. I was part of the hall now. I took a cautious step forward. The echo followed. The fog swirled tighter. The doors remained the same, yet impossibly moved. I exhaled, letting my breath cloud the air, watching it curl along my fingers. The corridor was endless. The fog was patient. And I was utterly alone, yet somehow not. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. Night pressed its cool fingers against the windows, fog curling along the sills. I ran my hand along the wall, rough paint under my fingertips. A low hum vibrated through the house. Not loud, but steady, musical, curling inside my chest. I pressed both hands to the plaster. The rhythm pulsed beneath my fingers, alive, insistent. Shadows along the walls shifted, subtle at first, then longer, stretching like they were dancing to the hum. I stepped back, breath catching. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood, metallic beneath the haze of tension. The hum grew, subtle vibrations thrumming under my feet. My heart matched it, hammering, thudding in the hollow of my chest. Every corner of the hallway seemed aware, watching, waiting. I moved slowly, tracing the walls, fingertips brushing the surface, feeling the resonance move along the plaster. It grew warmer beneath my palms, as if the house itself were breathing. I could feel it shift beneath me, subtle, imperceptible, alive. The shadows twisted, stretching toward me, curling along the ceiling, then retreating when I blinked. I caught glimpses of shapes just out of focus, long fingers, leaning figures, responding to the rhythm. The hum pulsed louder, and the tension in my chest tightened, pressing me against my own skin. I tried to listen beyond it. The faint rustling of the floorboards, the soft creak of settling walls. But the hum dominated, melodic, almost comforting, almost wrong. It seemed to speak without words, calling warning, holding me in place. I stepped away from the wall, and the vibration lingered under my palms. The shadows hesitated, then retreated just slightly, curling back toward the corners. The air smelled warmer now, closer, like the pulse of the house itself. I exhaled slowly, listening to the rhythm fading into my own heartbeat. The hum softened, but never fully disappeared. I felt it in my bones, a subtle insistence, the quiet knowledge that I was not alone. The hallway stretched before me, fog drifting along the edges, shadows swaying in soft time with the vibration. I could almost see them breathing with the walls, alive in the dark. Every instinct whispered to leave, to run, but curiosity rooted me to the floor. The hum pulsed one last time, gentle, lingering, like a whisper pressed against the back of my mind. I stepped back into the dim light, feeling the emptiness and the weight of presence all at once. The house settled, exhaling slowly, and the shadows pulled into corners, quiet, patient. I moved on, leaving the wall behind, but the vibration stayed under my skin, a reminder that the house listened, and I was part of its rhythm now. The hallway was colder than before. A thin layer of fog drifted along the floor, curling around my ankles. I had never noticed the door before. It stood slightly ajar, pale light spilling from the crack. The wood was worn, splintered at the edges, whispering under my fingertips as I brushed past. I paused. Inside, dust hung thick, soft as a fog, coating every surface. Objects were frozen mid-motion. An open book, a teacup tipped but unmoved, a chair pulled halfway from the wall. Time had stopped here. I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath me, echoing into the silence. The air was heavy, smelling faintly of old paper, damp wood, and sorrow. The door swung closed behind me. The latch clicked softly. Silence felt like a shroud, thick and pressing. I breathed slowly, careful, hearing each inhale as if it were amplified. Shadows pulled in corners, clinging to the edges of furniture. Light from a hall filtered through cracks, trembling across the dust motes that hung in the air. I ran my hand over a table. The dust shifted under my fingers, soft, almost alive. A whisper of static brushed against my ears, memory or imagination. I could not tell. The room felt alive in its stillness. A piano sat in the corner, keys exposed, silent. I imagined a note pressed, lingering, never fading. Every object seemed to watch, frozen witnesses of some long-forgotten life. I stepped carefully toward the window. Pale light filtered through grime, painting the walls in muted gray. The air felt thicker near the corners, heavier, as if the room remembered each presence that had entered before me. I touched a photograph on the mantel, faces blurred, indistinct, but their eyes seemed to follow, patient, waiting. The sorrow in the room was palpable, pressing against my chest, urging me to move quietly, respectfully. A soft creak from the floor. I froze. Nothing moved, and yet the space itself seemed aware of my heartbeat. I wandered slowly, fingertips grazing the walls. The dust stirred under each touch, releasing faint scent of age, time, and quiet despair. Shadows trembled as if breathing, stretching, then retreating. I stood in the center of the room. The silence hummed, low and constant, pressing against my ears and chest. I felt the weight of absence, of lives paused, of secrets unspoken. The door behind me remained closed. The fog lingered around my feet. I exhaled, long and careful, hearing the breath settle into the stillness. The room seemed to pulse in its quiet. I moved toward the center again, feeling the air thicken, soft vibrations brushing my skin. Every step felt measured, every motion magnified, every shadow alive. I glanced around once more. Dust motes drifted like tiny ghosts, suspended in the pale light. The objects stayed frozen, yet I felt them shift when I looked away, as if the room breathed in sync with me. I stepped back toward the door, hand hovering over the handle. The shroud of silence pressed tighter for a moment, then loosened. The weight of the forgotten pressed gently, urging memory to rest. I exhaled, letting the room settle around me. The fog clung to the corners. The shadows pulled back just enough. I left slowly, the latch clicking behind me, leaving the room alone again, wrapped in dust and quiet sorrow. The house felt still yet alive. A thin fog drifted along the floorboards, curling around my ankles. The air smelled faintly of ozone and damp wood, a quiet tension pressing in. I noticed it first as a static hum, low, almost musical, brushing against the edges of my hearing. It vibrated through the walls, soft under my fingertips when I pressed against the plaster. Whispers overlapped in the interference. Indistinct, yet hauntingly familiar. They rose and fell like soft waves, teasing meaning I could not grasp. I tilted my head, straining. Each shift in my gaze brought fleeting shapes at the corner of my vision. A shadow flickered behind the doorway. A curtain moved without wind. When I looked directly, nothing remained. The walls seemed to breathe with the murmurs. A subtle vibration hummed through the floor, rising into my chest. I felt it there, a rhythm syncopated with my own heartbeat. I stepped slowly, careful not to break the fragile quiet. Dust stirred under my feet, curling into pale motes that glimmered in the dim light. The hum and whispers followed, teasing, coaxing my attention into empty corners. A chair shifted slightly as I passed. I blinked. The hum softened, as if disappointed, the whispers curling around the corners of the ceiling. I pressed a hand against the wall. The vibrations traveled to my fingers, faint tremors in the air and wood. There was something alive here, something that existed in the hush between breaths. I focused on the whispers. Words formed, then dissolved, slipping through comprehension. A syllable lingered, my name, or something like it, drawn thin and quivering. I exhaled, cautious, letting the sound brush my cheek like a feather. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching unnaturally. They shifted with the rhythm of the hum, a slow dance I could not follow. The air tightened, holding a faint scent of burnt paper, fleeting and ghostly. I walked toward the hallway. The static rose in intensity, a soft layering of voices, overlapping and insistent. Each step I took seemed echoed, amplified in the hush between murmurs. A shape flickered near the ceiling, pale, almost translucent. I blinked. Gone. Only the whispers remained, curling around me, alive in their indecipherable language. I rested my palm against the wall again. The vibrations thrummed beneath my fingers, gentle yet insistent, like a heartbeat not my own. I felt the house's awareness, its quiet observation in every brick and beam. The static softened. The whispers lingered, teasing comprehension, curling around the edges of my hearing. I stood in the center of the hall, aware of the house vibrating beneath my feet, alive with murmurs and shadows. I exhaled, long and careful. The fog drifted higher, brushing my skin with cool fingers. The whispers faded slightly, leaving a lingering tension in the quiet. I stepped back, each motion deliberate, careful not to disturb the fragile balance. The hum pulsed beneath my feet one last time, a gentle reminder of presence. I listened, and the house held its breath with me. Silence returned, almost, yet the memory of whispers lingered, curling in the corners, soft and watchful. I moved slowly onward, aware that even when I could not hear, the murmurs remained alive in the stillness. The hallway stretched before me, pale light spilling from cracks in the door frames. Fog drifted low along the floor, curling around my ankles. The air smelled faintly of cold stone and something metallic, distant yet familiar. At the edge of the hall, a figure waited, pale, blurred, almost unreal. It didn't move, yet I felt its presence, a quiet insistence pressing behind me. Shadows bent unnaturally around it, elongating and twisting as if the light feared the shape. I swallowed, my throat dry. The floorboards whispered under my careful steps, each creak amplified in the stillness. I called out. No sound emerged from my lips. The fog seemed to drink the air, leaving only a cold hush in its place. The figure remained, waiting at the corner of my vision. Every blink made it shift slightly, not in movement, but in being, a reminder that it was there, observing, tethered the hallway in ways I could not understand. I felt my chest tighten. The air grew heavier, almost viscous, pressing against my skin. Each breath was drawn with effort, as if the room itself slowed the flow of oxygen. The shadows around the figure stretched further, reaching along the walls like fingers. I could almost hear them whisper, a soft rustle in the folds of fog. Something once human lingered in the space it occupied, an echo too quiet to name. I stepped closer, my footfalls muffled by the fog curling in the corners. The figure did not flee. It did not acknowledge me. It simply remained pale and still at the edge of everything I could see. The light shifted slightly, revealing more of the hallway. Dust motes danced in the faint glow, stirred by an invisible breath. The figure blurred again when I blinked, dissolving into the fog, leaving only the sense of absence behind. I reached out, though I knew it would be pointless. The air pressed cold against my fingers, brushing my skin with a quiet warning. I pulled back, heart hammering, feeling watched from every corner of the hall. Soft footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the fog. Not my own. Deliberate, measured, matching the rhythm of my fear. I stood still. The figure had vanished. Only the echo of it remained, a whisper of something lost and unquiet. The hallway breathed around me, fog curling in lazy spirals along the walls. I felt the chill linger, crawling along my spine. Every shadow, every flicker of light, seemed drawn to the place where it had been. I exhaled slowly, tasting the metallic tang of fear in my mouth. The house held its silence after the figure faded, but the memory of presence remained, subtle, unrelenting. I moved on careful, each step measured. The fog swirled with me, following, shaping the hall in quiet acknowledgement of what had passed. And even when I turned, even when I blinked, I knew the pale figure lingered, always at the edge, always waiting. The hall stretched long and narrow, pale light pooling from cracks in the walls. The air smelled faintly of cold stone and something older, wood dust and a faint metallic tang. Each step I took echoed softly, swallowed by the silence of the house. At the end of the hall, a door hummed, not loud, just beneath the awareness of my ears, vibrating against my bones. Light spilled from around its edges, pale and unsteady, shifting like fog caught in a breeze. I stopped. My hands itched to turn away. Every sense screamed to retreat, to leave the hallway empty and safe. Curiosity, quiet and insistent, nudged me forward. The floorboards groaned under my weight, their protest mingling with the hum. I reached the doorknob, cold metal biting my palm, tremors running up my arm. I pushed. Cold emptiness rushed out. It filled the hall in a slow tide, swallowing warmth, muffling the air. The fog inside seemed alive, curling around my ankles, rising with intent. Shadows twisted along the walls. Shapes formed in the corner of my eyes, too quick, too unnatural to follow. They bent and stretched, mocking impossible yet real. The door creaked wider. A breath of cold whispered past me, carrying hints of sorrow and old secrets. I stepped forward, each movement measured, aware of the silent weight pressing against my skin. The house exhaled. Soft, deep, a sigh that vibrated through the floor beneath me. The hum from the door pulsed, growing stronger with each heartbeat. I leaned closer, fog swirling around my shins, brushing cold along my calves. Shapes moved in patterns I could not name, edges of shadow curling toward the light. Something watched, patient, tethered to the doorway yet beyond reach. I tried to step back. The air clung to me, a heavy shroud, pulling at my clothes, at my hair, at the very space around me. The hum vibrated in my chest, a low resonance that made every nerve tingle. The hallway shifted imperceptibly. Walls seemed to lean. Corners stretched farther than they should, doors tightening against impossibility. The light from the edges of the door flickered, as if unsure whether to illuminate or consume. I drew a breath, tasting frost and iron on my tongue. The cold clung to me, lingering, crawling along my arms, reaching for the small warmth left in my body. Every instinct screamed to close the door, to flee. Yet I remained rooted, watching the impossible unfold. The shadows twisted higher now, stretching along the ceiling, moving with a slow deliberation. I felt eyes on me from everywhere and nowhere. The door pulsed again, light spilling and retreating like a heartbeat made visible. I took a step forward. The fog swirled thicker, curling around my ankles, whispering against my skin. The hum inside the door thrummed in time with my pulse, echoing in my chest, in my bones. I pulled back my hand. The cold lingered, brushing across my fingers, insistent. The shapes paused, as if waiting, aware of my hesitation. A soft creak sounded from deep within the house. The hum stuttered, rising and falling, like a voice struggling to speak. Silence pressing around me, heavy, patient, aware of every breath I drew. I let the door sway closed. The cold receded slightly, fog folding into shadows. The hum lingered, faint now, a reminder that the house remembered. I walked away slowly, each step careful, measured, alert to the shifting air, to the soft shadows trailing behind. The hallway returned to its familiar emptiness, or so I hoped. But in the back of my mind, I knew the door waited. Light spilling, hum vibrating, shadows twisting. Patient, waiting for the next time curiosity overtakes caution. Fog clung to my ankles as I stepped out of the house. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of moss and cold earth. Every breath I drew seemed swallowed by the quiet. The door closed behind me, or perhaps it didn't. A weight pressed in my chest, subtle but unyielding, as if the house exhaled long after I left. Shadows from the trees twisted in the mist, stretching toward me, reaching but never touching. The forest was silent. No wind stirred, no leaves rustled. Yet I felt eyes, many eyes, following, watching from the dark spaces between trunks. Each step I took made my own heartbeat loud. It echoed against memory, echoing in the corners of the house I had left behind. Whispers lingered there, faint but insistent, brushing the edges of my mind. I walked slowly, fog curling around my legs like slow smoke. The cold seeped through my shoes, through my socks, biting at the skin beneath. A metallic tang clung to the air, a reminder of the weight left behind. Silence pressed down, thick and patient. I could almost feel the house leaning, stretching beyond its walls, pressing its absence against me. A soft hum vibrated in memory, the low pulse of a place that knew me and would not release me. The path ahead disappeared into pale light. I saw my breath coil in the cold, mingling with the fog that still clung stubbornly to the edges of the clearing. The forest seemed frozen, every branch and stone waiting, attentive. I dared to look back. The house stood still, pale in the fog, but something in its shape shifted ever so slightly. A shadow lingered at the window, fading when I blinked, leaving the memory of a gaze that had never left me. My footsteps slowed. Every soft crunch against the leaf-strewn ground was mirrored in memory, repeating in the mind of the house. The whispers, muted now, traced my spine, brushing my neck, curling around my thoughts. I felt the air grow heavier, scented with cold and with smoke that wasn't there. The fog thickened, pressing damp fingers against my arms, around my chest. I shivered, aware that the house had left a piece of itself, a quiet pulse beneath the edges of reality. I tried to push forward, to put distance between me and that place. The ground beneath my feet seemed to stretch, pulling, bending under the weight of memory. Every rustle in the fog suggested movement that wasn't mine, shapes that dissolved before I could see. A final step brought me to the forest edge. The house was behind me, pale and patient, fading slowly in the mist. Yet the silence it left was thick, as if it clung to me, following invisibly. I inhaled the cold air, tasting fog and iron. The whispers in memory traced my thoughts, and I knew they would not leave. The path ahead was quiet, still, but the house had left its mark in every shadow. I turned away. Fog drifted through the trees, brushing my shoulders. The silence remained. It waited, patient, and I walked on, carrying the house with me.